Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. If you like what you see today and you want to find out more about CG Pro, you can follow us at becomecgpro.com or in our Facebook group. And today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Brett Leonard. Welcome, Brett.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Great to be here.
Great to have you here. Brett, for anyone who doesn't know, you should know, Brett is an incredible creative force. He's a super talented film director, innovator, pioneer. The list goes on. The man of many talents. He has made some incredible movies over the years, some of which you may know, going back to the Lawnmower Man and Virtuosity. The Lawnmower Man inspired me to get into computer graphics in the first place. That was one of the movies that did it for me, with Jurassic Park being another one. Brett was the director of Lawnmower Man, and it was a very pioneering use of computer graphics and telling stories using new technologies. Brett is... I have too many things that I could mention. Brett is an incredible talent behind the camera, but also really pushes the technology and the way that we tell stories, and that's probably some of what we'll talk about tonight. Brett, welcome.
Well, hey, great to be here. It's an interesting time for storytelling, or as we like to say now, story worlding.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you've been on the bleeding edge for a long time now. You've been pushing what's possible in cinema for a long time, and it's thanks to you and people like you to people who take risks in what we do and pushing the medium to the various mediums to do things that they're not supposed to do and find new ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's the unique thing. The technology, which really are tools, that, and this is through human history, really, it changes the nature of our expression. And in cinema history, the technology associated with cinema has always changed the nature of cinematic expression. And now that we're moving into this era of immersion, which to me is still connected to this larger concept of cinema in general. Kind of cinema is my religion, so I still like to think of things in the evolutionary form in the context of cinema. Although there are definitely things changing in the nature of an immersive experience and how story can be explored and discovered within that. So there's a lot to talk about there. But the really unique thing is that the tools change the nature of how we tell things, but also what we tell. And this goes back to some of the media ecologists, going back to Marshall McLuhan and, the idea that the medium is the message and all these things. And we're in this era right now of just rapid change and development of these tools. Obviously, there's been so much, focus on virtual production process and things like that. But as we've been talking about, there's so many things that can be experimented with in the nature of how these tools spark our imaginations and spark our inspiration as people creating story worlds that have the idea of narrative and story within them. And, even going back to the Lawnmower Man, as you mentioned, I mean, that was the nature of how I had to do the effects on that film, given its very minor budget for that time. And the fact we had, 27 minutes of digital effects in it. T2 had 7 and was $120 million, and we were $5 million and had 27 minutes. So we had to explore and express the aesthetic of what I called at that point a kind of cyberdelic revolution. It's something that wasn't trying to be photorealistic. It was actually trying to express this idea of virtual reality, which we kind of popularized the term with that film. And it's its own thing, because the tools and the limitations we had forced us into certain processes. And I think that kind of experimentation is something we should do even as the tools get more and more advanced and sophisticated.
I totally agree. I think visual effects, been doing it for 15 years professionally anyway, and during that time it's felt like some parts of it became very procedural and worked out, and
yes.
It made me want to go and tear it up a little bit and try and figure out some new stuff just to keep it interesting. So I want to ask you, like, what were some early experiences for you that made you want to get into making movies and playing around with technology?
When I was 7 or 8, I went and saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I built up to that. I begged my father to take me to that film. I saw that was coming, and really Stanley Kubrick is the reason that I was spurred to do things in the cinematic medium, which is kind of interesting because really he was pushing and changing and disrupting the idea of cinematic storytelling. He wasn't doing traditional narrative storytelling. And also his use of the technology. So, one of the reasons I got involved with visual effects in general was that there was this great book by a guy named Jerome Engel, who created this book called The Making of 2001. Now, I was a kid, and I started reading it when I was just, 9 years old or something. I read it probably 20 times before I understood any of it. But it really got me into the experimentation. It introduced me to people like Douglas Trumbull, who later became a mentor of mine, who just recently passed away this last year. Doug, you're in a wonderful virtual visual effect in the sky, beyond the firmament. He was a true pioneer. And, and the way Kubrick was playing with story, that I think it really tweaked me in that direction of wanting to go. And one of the reasons I became involved with this idea of virtual reality, because really he was a precursor to virtual environments. In a way, he was making narrative environments that were discoverable, that were, you could navigate through with your mind, even though you're watching the film again and again. I've seen that film about 152 times, I think. And it's different each time. I mean, I think that there's been precursors to this idea of immersive storytelling. I think Fellini was an example of that. He would, bring all these actors and equipment into the Cinecittà studios in Rome, and then he would go and discover this story with them. I mean, if you look at the behind the scenes of him making films, he would literally be screaming at everybody everywhere to change things and telling the performers how to react, because they post-dubbed everything in the Italian cinema at that time, and still do in a lot of ways. And so it allowed this, again, process experimentation with the tools that were being given. If you look at the French New Wave, the tools of the Eclair, handheld cameras that allowed someone like Godard to go out and create Breathless on the streets of Paris, and all of these things came these moments of inspirational disruption of what came because of people experimenting with new technologies. And we are in a plethora of new technologies right now, and in some ways there's less experimentation because they're all focused on how can we get more efficient in the traditional form of media making. And that's one of the things I'm most interested in talking with young people about is what do they see? What's inspirational to them about what these allow, what real-time technologies allow, as an example, these procedural techniques. This really starts to open our minds to an entirely new way of being as storytellers or story worlders.
So how did you break into the industry and start being able to, what were some experiments that you did in the beginning? What did you start to do practically yourself after the inspiration?
Yeah, well, I started to make films with Super 8 movie film. I was a Super 8 guy. At that time, there was a magazine called Super 8 Filmmaker, and it really, and I just got this. I could make whole feature films in Super 8, which I did. I made a couple feature-length films in Super 8, and literally cutting that spaghetti. I mean, that was one of the most daunting things to. And so I learned to do things like edit in the camera. I called it ICE, in-camera editing. I'd ICE a scene, which means I could go out and create an action scene, and by thinking it through economically, could actually film it in the rhythm of the film. And then I wouldn't have to put that splice that would jump in the projector in there. And so my films looked a little sort of more professional and slick at a very early age because I was doing in-camera editing. And then there was a great camera called the Niso 6080, which allowed you to do effects in camera. It allowed you to do long superimpositions and dissolves and things like that because it would wind the film back. It had a larger magazine at that time. And so exploring with Super 8 became really the most amazing, sort of laboratory for me in just learning cinematic language. And starting with, I think my first Super 8 camera was literally the Kodak Instamatic Super 8 camera, which was the most basic thing possible, but it had this amazing little lens on it, and you could create really stunning, striking imagery with it. And so it fired me to want to take that, further. And I actually never played around with 16 millimeter. I went right to 35. When I started making feature films, my first film, The Dead Pit, which of course was a zombie movie, which I filmed in Milpitas, which is just under San Francisco, in an abandoned insane asylum. I used a lot of the things that I played with in Super 8 and brought them over into 35 because I needed that economy to get a film done with. And we shot that in 10, 12 days. And it was, but it was we literally were staying in the abandoned insane asylum, crashing on these old cots. I mean, there were definitely ghosts there. So,
wow.
Again, for me, it's all the things I've done that have been, for me, really fundamental have been experimentation, have been experimenting with process. And that is something I'm really, at this phase of my career, I'm more interested in than ever, especially given the new tools that exist. I mean, with AI procedural generation, I mean, this stuff is just phenomenally interesting. There's some, things that cautionary notes that we could, talk about around some of these procedural techniques. But at the same time, we haven't played enough with it to know what the hell it brings us to. There's things that, I think for a young generation of people that are, the new generation of filmmakers, storytellers, storyworlders, immersive enthusiasts that are coming into the medium, it's a time to really sort of kind of try to break the processes that have been embedded in tradition and custom at this point, and really see where it can take us. Kind of like that moment in the French New Wave that happened, but now it's an immersive new wave. It's a procedural new wave, and these the tools are becoming more and more accessible to do that, as you're very well aware.
Absolutely, yeah. What advice would you have for people kind of starting out, or maybe people who've been doing it for a while, to kind of try and break free of those molds? I guess like people starting out in the industry might tend to want to be mentored and learn from people who've been doing it a certain way and be able to get jobs and opportunities, and that probably encourages more narrow thinking and less experimentation.
Which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny for me. In order for me to break into the business, when I was doing it, I had to do it in different ways in order to differentiate myself. It was a time of much less opportunity. I mean, there wasn't any internet. There wasn't these amazing, we couldn't make films on our phones. None of that existed. And so you had to, get support, and yet you had to create an excitement around your process that showed maybe this would, come across with a different effect or a different outcome narratively or emotionally or visually. And I think that excitement for finding new ways of expressing and breaking down and deconstructing cinema and storytelling should be at the core of what's going on now. We've kind of come to this moment where a lot of stories have been told, a lot of modalities have been played with. And so in order to, break the mold, you really need to push and kind of sideways think. And sometimes the technology allows that in a way that it becomes an initial inspiration. You can actually, go to another place because you're playing with the technology in a way that it's not meant to be done that way. I mean, if you look at great classic films like Citizen Kane was Orson Welles at 25 years old, finding out that this thing was just invented by this guy at RKO called the optical printer. And almost that entire film, all the shots, the deep focus shots, the composite shots, that's a huge visual effects film. And it was made because Orson was playing around with the optical printer. There were no rules. There was nothing to guide him. And because of that, he made this tremendous innovative film that changed cinema. The same thing that Kubrick did when he was playing with the technology he was working out with Doug Trumbull, early motion control, slit scan, all of these things that ended up being the foundations of why, much more commercially focused films like Star Wars films were even possible. So what happens is experimentation becomes the new commerciality. So in a way, the idea that, I've got to go the traditional route in order to get a job, in order to get embedded in the industry is actually a misnomer. And I think at this moment in time, breaking the mold is even more important. Now, I will say that in order to break the mold, you got to know what the mold is that you're breaking. Right. You have to, knowing what good narrative is, knowing how that works in the human conscious and unconscious, that's really important. I do see a lot of things done by new filmmakers that want to be, in a sense, hip by shifting the way in which the resolution happens in narrative. And in a way, it feels like they're doing it just to be able to sort of break, well, we're not doing it the traditional way, we're doing it in a way that disrupts that. But if you're doing it in a way that disrupts it without actually understanding how to make a good solid story that actually resolves emotionally, it doesn't have the same effect. And so it's really a combination, I think, of really diving deeply into the traditional methodologies and then seeing how you can break them from your own inspiration.
So what advice would you give to someone seeking to do that? I know mentoring and working with other people who are great storytellers, watching a lot of movies, etc., is a good way to try to understand filmmaking.
I mean, in a way, you kind of sacrifice a part of your life to get in cinema because you end up watching so many movies. So much of your actual lifetime is watching movies and deconstructing them. And I really encourage people to look, especially those that are growing up in the Hollywood system or coming into this system and really want to, be part of that, to look at other world cinema, to look at cinema that there's so much amazing cinema that happens all over the world that often doesn't come to this market. There are things like the Criterion Channel that sort of, give a showcase for that, but there's much, much deeper research into world cinema that can happen. The cinema of Lagos in Nigeria is like there's an entire genre of cinema that happens that's done with almost no money at all, and it's tremendously innovative. And they distribute it by handing out DVDs in traffic jams. And hit films in the Lagos world of come about from that distribution modality. So the idea of taking the new tools, I mean, really at this point, with the ability to create visual effects in a very sophisticated way with tools that are free, like Blender. You've got all the tools available, all the image acquisition tools you could possibly imagine in your pocket, essentially. And so, as Stanley Kubrick said, it actually was quoted in that book I mentioned, The Making of 2001. People always ask me, said, just go make film. That's the only way you can figure it out. Now, that was at a time when it was much more difficult to do that. You had to really get a lot of. Now, I mean, you don't need to go even to a college and get the tools. You can actually find those tools online. You could shoot with your phone, play around, and really find out what works for you and your point of view as a storyteller or a story worlder, and all the richness of the tool set now is mind-boggling to what it used to be. And so I would say, there's no excuse for anybody to not really play around and find their own voice utilizing the tools and do it without a lot of resource. Because one of the things for me, I mean, I came up having to figure out, new ways. Like I wanted to make a big movie, The Lawnmower Man, about virtual reality and lots of digital effects, but I didn't have a big budget. So I had to figure out new ways and bring in new artists, new people to do it in not the traditional way that was being done at that time at ILM. I wasn't able to afford that. So we got something unique. I'm not saying it's even in competition with the other thing. It's just something different, something unique that happens when you sort of bolt these pieces together in a new way and you find other creative artists. There's so many interesting artists out there playing around with these things out in the world, because the tools are so accessible now. You don't have to go into a $1,000 an hour suite in order to create some pretty amazing aesthetic environments. And so that playing around with that, and then playing with how do we create truly interactive narrative. I think one of the things that I'm most interested in at this point is, and have been, thinking about it for quite a while, and I kind of got into it because I made films about virtual reality, and so it sort of just took my mind from, I was making traditional narrative films about virtual reality, but the idea of immersive environments being, an exploration of narrative, an exploration of how to create agency within the context of narrative. That is a mind-bending process. And to this day, it's what occupies a lot of my mind space. I've been working on a theory I call narrative magnets for 25 years, which is about how to create curation and story tropes and genre tropes within a narrative environment. And looking back at filmmakers like Kubrick and Fellini, and even Ridley Scott is in many ways an environmental filmmaker. He makes narrative environments. I mean, Blade Runner is really a narrative environment more than it is a traditional plot. I mean, the plot is incredibly simple. Android chases other androids, finds out he's an android. I mean, you don't watch that movie again and again because of the plot. You watch that because you're exploring a narrative environment that has such richness in it. And so that's what we need to get to in the context of true immersive storytelling that has agency. So I think that edge is something for a new generation of storytellers, storyworlders to really start to play with in a much greater way. Whenever I speak at colleges or for groups of young filmmakers, I always learn so much from them because they are playing around with these new modalities. And then I'm sure you're aware of, some of the VTubers that are out there, playing around with these things, using new tools like Blender. We were talking a little bit earlier about back rooms and the creepypasta movement, which is, and who would ever come up with this in a traditional Hollywood environment? And they're adding on to these creepy environments and then bringing characters in and kind of building story as a community around that, something that just came out of one 16-year-old creator of environments. He started making these rooms that kind of felt like empty, creepy office complexes. And then that led to the idea of exploring a narrative within that. I mean, that's fascinating to me. And how the group mind plays with these things and engages with it. That's what I think that all this connectivity can be really a positive thing for. The idea of empowering people to create with these tools and not just lean back and be receptacles for creation. I think we're in that moment where really the idea that the Hollywood people are at the top of the mountain and we're the monks in the cathedral that are sending the calligraphy down to the masses who can't write or read, and that's now starting to be turned all around. I think there's a bottom up process experimentation starting to happen because the tools are accessible and because of the connectivity. We're not at the end of the disruption that's going to be happening because of streaming services. I mean, streaming services are still in a flux in terms of what the business model is going to be. I mean, if you've looked at recently, Netflix has been hitting the wall with certain aspects of its business model. So nothing is set in stone. And by the way, I would say for all the young people trying to get into the business, that is an exciting time to be part of this business because it's not just one or two routes. It's really something that you could create an entirely new way of getting your material to an audience or engaging people as participants in your material. That's something I think is where a lot of the experimentation can really take us to new heights of human imagination.
So being a director and a storyteller and being really good at crafting stories and directing people through a story, how do you take that and then kind of flip the script and then give people a place to explore where they could kind of go anywhere? You still, I'm guessing you want to guide them a little bit, but give them some freedom, but not too much freedom, because then they get lost and they don't have a good experience.
Well,
how do you?
Yeah, there's freedom and then there's chaos. So there's engaging a decentralized, a form of storytelling, and then there's mob rule. These things, we have to find a medium way of bringing agency and decentralization into storytelling, into expressing world creation, the idea of creating world assets and creating worlds as a group mind, which I think can unlock a tremendous amount of the genius of the group mind. I think that, again, this can be a really positive aspect of the fact we're all connected together in such a unique way. I mean, there's a lot of negativity out there around the fact that we're connected together in social media and all these different things. And there's a lot of diatribes we could go on and cautionary tales we could tell about that. But I would prefer to look at what's the responsibility we have now to actually flip that and make that a positive energy within media. Media has been, such a, it's been so maligned and so deified at the same time. We need to find, again, that middle ground where we can find creative empowerment, really unlocking the genius of the group mind, and yet, experimenting with these new structures in a way that we discover together. Because you know what humans love to do? They love to discover things. And so for me, I'm, having been a film director now for over 30 years, I've gotten all of my jollies out of sort of top down decision making. I mean, making something exactly the way you want. I mean, there's the whole auteur theory and that's all. Look, it's been great and fun, but what really I became more and more sensitive to is exploring and discovering things, especially with actors, especially with the creative collaborators, and that discovery together as a group, as a community, in a sense, almost in the tribal ritual of creation that cinema is. That's become more and more what's interesting to me. And I think, in a way, a new generation can start at this idea that really what we're doing is a kind of tribal ritual of creation that goes out there. It affects culture, it changes culture, and now we're asking the rest of the culture to become part of that process. The idea of the creator economy, all of these ideas that bring value to not a top-down hierarchy of creation, but more of a bottom-up hierarchy of creation. And I think that these are the things that need to be explored. There's no simple answers to any of this right now. This is, we're in a moment of kind of chaos. We're also in a moment of tremendous challenges in the world. So there's a lot of things to express as artists, to express as storytellers. And in a way, I think the moment is ripe for new movements to happen within the context of cinema. I mean, a lot of people say, well, cinema as it existed is dead. You get a lot of that talk out there. It's all been done, or it's been co-opted by just making giant superhero movies, all these things that lament. I don't think that that's a positive way of looking at it. I think that the craft that goes into the giant Hollywood films is tremendous craft, tremendous artistry that goes into even the biggest blockbusters, and yet there has to be this other kind of experimentation going on simultaneously that finds another value equation, which is why this idea of the metaverse, which is, I have a podcast called What the F is the Metaverse. I do it with my son, Shannon Leonard. It's an intergenerational communication. You can find it on any, on Apple Podcasts. It's because no one knows what it is. And for me, it's an environment of experimenting with these ideas of how you create aesthetics, how you create environments, characters, emotions, and yes, narrative. And engaging people in a more group experience of that becomes a very deep positive thing that the networkability of our connections allows, that never has happened before on the planet to this degree. So I think it's a tremendously exciting time to actually be a utopian, to actually look at things that can have utopian outcomes. Not that it's going to be easy, not that it's going to be, that we can't look at all the cautionary notes that are out there. And the irony for me is that most of the films I've made about virtual reality have been cautionary tales. That's really where I started. But I'm now looking at, well, how do we inspire people to see the new ways these tools can come together and express another level of human imagination, another level of human expression that has never happened before. And in a way, Hollywood has represented that since the beginning of its inception. And now it's transforming into a kind of Hollywood of the mind that exists for a much larger subset of people than just the ones that are crazy like myself that, made it into the system somehow and got to direct. I mean, you had to be a kind of crazed maniac to make it into that system. And now I think there's ways of people to express within the context of cinema writ large, of where immersive cinema is going, all of these ideas of cinema with agency and interactivity, so many edges now that are new boundaries that are being pushed in this idea of discovery. And that's really what's exciting. If we can discover some things new together, there's an excitement and inspiration comes out of that I think inspires us to maybe solve some of the intractable problems that we have going on in the world.
Right, which should be the point of storytelling, is to explore, educate.
Yeah, the point of artistry in general, the point of artists working together. I mean, the thing that's so unique about cinema has been it's such a collaborative art form. I mean, that's why I think the auteur theory is a little bit. I mean, I've been a proponent of it. I love the auteur filmmakers and have studied them. But at the same time, the truth of making film and making cinema is that you're always on the edge of chaos with a group of people trying to find a way of making it work, trying to find a way of making something new. And that tribal experience is really the thing that actually has given my soul the greatest joy, more so than just being able to express an exact idea in the exact storyboard that that may have been in my mind. In a way, throwing out the ideas that you found you form as a foundation, and then allowing that experience of discovery with a group of people. That, I think, is at the core of how humans have created civilization in general. And now we're creating a virtual civilization. We're creating a kind of digital twin of the planet that is sitting within and interacting with the quote unquote real world. Well, really, it's a part of the real world. The idea that it's not real, the idea that artificial intelligence is artificial, I think that's a misnomer, because it's coming from us. It's coming from our creation. So in a way, it's extended intelligence. It's augmented intelligence. And I believe that there are ways of that reflecting the better angels of our nature, especially as creators. I mean, I don't know how many of the people listening to this have been playing with DALL-E, DALL-E 2, and Midjourney, and things that are procedural generation of art with computer collaboration. I mean, it's astonishingly addictive, and it's really, really fun, because you start to feel like your talents are being augmented by this tool that, again, is coming from humans. So it's not really something outside of us. I think it's something that's coming from the inside of us. And if you look at it that way, I think the inspiration can be a much more powerful thing.
What speaking of AI tools, of which are beginning to emerge, and even into visual effects to take away some of the stuff we don't want to do, but also on the creative end of things, with things you were mentioning, Midjourney and those kinds of things. What are some of the things you'd love to be able to do through that way of expressing? Well,
I am officially developing what I call Lawnmower Man Reborn, which is, people would think, oh, it's a sequel or it's a reboot, or, no, it's going to be a metaverse world that I want to lean into the process experimentation of using AI human interaction and collaboration, group mind collaboration for story, and finding what can happen in a world from narrative tropes that are created from some of the original ideas and themes that were part of that film, which really are about the extension of human consciousness, about the extension of the human becoming data, all of these ideas, some of which were cautionary, some of which were sort of celebratory, and then seeing where that goes in discovery, and then having a metaverse world out of which can fall a feature film that is literally created by the group mind. So it's, in a sense, flipping the entire script on me being a director, not really, coming at it from this idea of I am directing it, but more I'm curating with maybe a group of curators that are allowing things to be discovered by the group and also by the human-machine collaboration. Imagine environments being created with human-machine collaboration almost in real time that then spark the imagination of the group and where the story can go, and then how a character may look in the context of a human computer collaboration, and that becoming part of the emotional structure of what that story, that character is all about, which then goes back to and informs character. There's also some really amazing things happening in the context of AI story creation as well. There's a group in Australia that I've been talking with recently that are doing some pretty amazing things and enabling going into an environment and having all, both macro and micro story decisions affecting the environment in real time, so that you're creating this story world in real time and seeing where it goes. I think in that process, we're going to discover something new. Just like, again, like the French New Wave discovered something new about cinema because of the technologies they were using. And I don't know what exactly that will be, but that's what's exciting about it. So I'm trying to basically form all of the projects I'm working on around this idea of process experimentation. And there's also some other tool makers I'm working with that are doing things with procedural generation in an Unreal 5 environment, where we're trying to see how rapidly can we create really high-end animation of a story, and get just a tremendous, sophisticated output, but doing it with procedural generation in a way that allows us to be more free in that collaborative real-time process. And again, we don't know what we're going to discover, but I think the discoveries are going to be unique because it's taking, the idea of how stories in cinema have been created and really accelerating it with these tools and with AI in a way that we won't know the outcome. Now, there are many that will say there's a lot of misnomers to this. There are many that will almost lament aspects of this. And I understand those arguments, absolutely. But without a process experimentation, how are we going to know? And I believe that there's ways of doing this that can find whole new forms of storytelling, whole new genres that have never been created before, that we're going to be discovering together because of the nature of what these tools express. And in a way, what that means is we are exploring the expansion of human consciousness and imagination to a much, much deeper degree. And one of the other things I'm doing, which, I'll talk a little bit about after whatever your next question is this idea of finding immersive environments that are actually healing in nature, actually finding a way of creating really positive media experiences, especially in the context of immersion and virtual experience, which is so intimate. It's such a, it affects us much more intimately than the lean back experience of going and watching a screen or watching, whether it's small or large, in traditional cinema. And there's some experimentation I've been doing in that lately as well. We can talk about.
Well, I can definitely ask you a question that will go into that. I am really fascinated by that myself, and worked on lots of different forms of media, from movies, commercials, and VR. The beginnings of the last wave of VR, one of the things we made was a VR meditative experience of monarch butterflies flying around, and it was simple. I just wanted to make something, put it on Google Play and get it out there and play. It was one of the first 10, I think, VR experiences on Google Play. But the first thing I noticed, and especially going around and giving it to people, was the expression when they put it on. It was a simple experience, but they said they felt calm when they put it on. They felt better than they had before, and that really struck me as an experience that was so simple could affect somebody so profoundly and in a kind of a healing way. And I've always since wanted to do a lot more with it. Tell me some of your thoughts on how powerful that is.
Well, so during the beginning part of the pandemic, a group of my associate collaborators, Josh Shore, Billy Alfonso, and my friend Dr. Skip Rizzo, formed a company called Virtual Psychedelics Incorporated, VPI. And the idea was to create healing virtual environments. Now, a lot came out of Dr. Skip's research. He runs the ICT lab at USC, he has for almost 20 years. And has also been the pioneering VR clinician on the planet. Skip's work has been a lot in the area of solving PTSD with behavioral therapy and virtual reality. He works a lot with veterans, sometimes with rape victims, et cetera. And it's shown over a 20-year period to have great efficacy. He has over 300 plus peer-reviewed papers and a tremendous corpus of knowledge and data around how virtual experience can help rewire the brain around traumatic events. And also, that means that anything that deals with sort of neuroplasticity and the idea of rewiring neuronic pathways in the brain, VR and immersive environments become a real modality for that kind of healing outcome. And so we are exploring that within the context of my company. Again, basing it on the scientific foundation that Skip has been doing for over 25 years. And, one of the kind of fun aspects, the reason Skip and I came together is because he saw the Lawnmower Man 30 years ago. By the way, this is the 30th anniversary of the Lawnmower Man this year.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. And he saw it, and he was in the midst of his studies at that time and thought, and was one of the reasons he took his therapies into the idea of virtual reality. And if you look at the film, go back and look at the film, there's a lot of things in there about affecting the brain, about having positive outcomes with, so it was a little bit prescient in that, even though that was just, fantasy at that time. Skip actually took it and made it real. So
right.
now I'm working with him to try to find positive, healthcare outcomes, especially for things like, the things we're in a pandemic for now, beyond just the viral pandemic. We're in the pandemic of depression. We're in a pandemic of PTSD, anxiety. These things are very, very addressable in the context of immersive media experience. So I've been playing with the idea of creating a new genre of media, which I call MIM, medicinal immersive media, meaning using the immersion, using the fact that it's a much more intimate media experience in a way that creates healthcare and positive healing outcomes, but really basing it in science, not just, let's go into a kind of groovy environment that feels relaxing. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but actually finding the ways that, the sonic nature of environment, the color space and psychology of an environment, the way in which cymatics, I don't know if you are familiar with the science of cymatics, which is a little bit. There's so many unique things that have been studied in the context of how sound can be visualized and how that affects the psychology and even the physiology of the human being. And so we're bringing all these things together. We have a project called the Chrysalis Environment.
I have the same water bottle. I just noticed as you.
Yeah, the Ayurvedic water bottle. Yes. Yeah. We want to create the Chrysalis environment to be a way of delivering MIM, medicinal immersive media, in an environment that is not strapping a box on your head. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with traditional forms of virtual reality. And look, the Quest 2 has had tremendous success. And I know we're going to evolve beyond that. And one of the things is, what really is immersion? What counts as a truly immersive experience? Does it have to be 360? I don't think it does. I think there's ways of creating an immersive experience that doesn't have to be in the traditional form of quote unquote virtual reality. And so the Chrysalis environment is something we're moving into prototyping right now with, and we're working with other companies that are playing around with psychedelic research, psychedelic therapies, and finding ways of blending virtual therapy with psychedelic therapy for some of these intractable problems that people are having with depression and anxiety. And it's really exciting, Ed, because it's a new frontier. And the idea that we could actually create a positive genre of media that is just about healing people. I mean, for me, that is a great, reason for me to put my attention to it. It's because there's so many potential negative things. And again, I told mostly cautionary tales around the idea of virtual reality. So the idea of creating healing environments and really basing that in a science that can become more and more rich as the data continues to come in. And by the way, there's tremendous research being done all over the world with how virtual and immersive experience affects the neurology. There's neurologists that are making that the center of their research. It's being done at many of the big medical research places, or the Harvard Medical School, even Cedars-Sinai here has a huge initiative, the Mayo Clinic, all of these things that are now starting to come together to make media a positive thing for humanity, as opposed to it just being something we have to be aware of or can stimulate us or can entertain us, and go beyond that. And that idea, which we're, again, really at the beginning of, even though someone like Skip's been working on it for over 30 years, and I expressed these ideas in a film 30 years ago, it's still very early days. And so that discovery and experimentation is really, really a great part of my life right now, because in even experiencing it myself in some of the ways that we're playing around with this, it has tremendously positive outcomes, and it feels, whether you're combining it with microdosing with psychedelics or you're doing it just in a virtual psychedelic form, there are ways of stimulating that kind of experience in a virtual environment without any drugs at all. And that's where, it's one of the places we're moving in this. So, anyway,
I love the idea, and I'm really I'm keen on Kevin Max in that sense, because it is very psychedelic by nature. It brings up those kinds of.
Kevin is one of the great experimenters of this medium. I mean, he's been pushing it, and the way in which when a lot of his environments are kind of procedurally generated, the way in which you navigate and move through, and his idea, Kevin often talks about this idea of positive engagement as opposed to negative engagement. And, you know, in most entertainment and stories, you get a lot of negative engagement, because negative engagement, we're hardwired for negative engagement. We're hardwired to, like, for the flight or fight syndrome, to be scared of something and then moving to change that. The idea of creating positive engagement in narrative, positive engagement in virtual environments, is a much greater challenge. And really, what we need to go there. And so Kevin's been one of the great evangelists of that from the very beginning. And I always loved hearing him talk and showing his work, because it really felt like he was going for a new kind of immersive experience that is, in a sense, medicinal immersive media. It is something that creates a healing outcome.
Absolutely, yeah. We had him on one of the earlier podcasts and talked about exactly that. I think it's really fascinating to explore it, and it's interesting thinking of, you know, storytelling. As you said, there's lots of kind of formulas to it, or we have a negative bias, so that, like, people either lean into the kind of apocalypse story or the kind of sappy ending. You know, either one is, like, maybe not the perfect way, but it feels like you need some tension in it. You need some contrast, and you need to be able to, like, not go fully down one road or the other. You need some balance.
Exactly right. It's a time to, like, blend the idea of dystopian storytelling with utopian storytelling. You know, the idea that you can have a dystopian, challenging, cautionary environment or narrative that then pivots and creates outcomes that are again discovery of something that's new and possible. The idea that there are different possibilities. And this idea of combining, imagine doing, you know, a large virtual environment or a giant feature film even that had the idea of healing people within it, you know, and at the same time telling a story that engages a mass audience in a way. And I personally feel that there have been many films that have done that over the years, that we don't, you know, we don't necessarily focus on it with that dialectic, but we actually have that experience and it changes our lives. Some of the films that change our lives have that great moment of sort of expansion of human consciousness, or the idea of feeling a healing energy. And yet it's being done in a very commercial, mass accessible way, you know? And so, and then you have films that do that in a very non-accessible way that's very experimental and avant-garde. And all those modalities are valid, you know, for exploration. But now we're really getting to where, with the power of the technology, with the power of immersion, with the power of what we're able to create in a virtual environment, the responsibility we have as creators, and this is something I think that's really important for the young people coming up into this field, there's a greater responsibility than ever, because there's so much connectivity. What we create does matter. There's always been a kind of great why at the center of Hollywood, and it was expressed in the famous Jack Warner quote, you know, if you got a message, send it Western Union. And look, and in a way that, you know, I understand that you don't want to preach to an audience or anything like that, but at the same time, feature films and this kind of these collaborative art forms that have become mass media experiences, they affect world culture. They affect global thinking. They affect the way and so if we are constantly bombarded with dystopian ideas around climate change is absolutely intractable, it's non-reversible, and we might as well just give up. Look, it is tremendously challenging, but I think there's ways of telling stories or showing worlds around that give hope, that create the idea that we could, just beyond that horizon, discover something new, discover something that's going to bring us solutions that we never could have thought of for these intractable problems. And when you talk to younger people, you know, even very young people about that, they really respond to that, because they don't want to go into a world with no solutions. They want a world that so showing solutions or the possibility of solutions in storytelling or story worlding is really critical. And I think there's a tremendous platonic responsibility that is at the core of what we do at this point. I've always felt it, actually. And then once you've made a hit movie and it goes out there, and over the years, probably about 1 billion people have seen my films, that is, it comes back to you in a way that you really realize, wow, this has got, you know, this thing we do is not just fluff and cotton candy. It's something that can really, truly affect people. And then I meet people like Skip who, you know, focus their healing work because of watching a crazy movie like Lawnmower Man. I mean, you realize, wow, that inspiration that we give out there as creators, and then bringing people in to that process of creation so that they're not just absorbing it, but actually become part of it. That's the thing that I think is really the undiscovered country that we're looking for in this new, era that we're moving into right now.
Right. Yeah. Stories are an immersive experience already. Like a character in a movie is something that you project yourself into. That's the part of the point of it. And we're adding technologies to be able to immerse you more and more.
Yeah.
But they are ultimately already immersive. Like they're designed to take you into an experience as deeply as possible, to give you a transformational experience.
Well, and as people may understand, the immersive experiences like Immersive Go and these things that are actually pretty basic, in all honesty, they become a huge magnet for people to go out of the home and experience immersivity together. So there's a whole new genre of experiences that are happening in the immersive realm in domes. I don't know how many of the people here have been down to Wisdome and the kinds of experiences that happen down there downtown. I'm really looking forward to bringing more narrative things. I'm working with my partner Mark Ricard on some very unique projects. We can't talk about exactly what they are, but bringing storytelling, even some very classic storytelling, in the context of an immersive dome experience. And again, that process experimentation there's an audience out there and actually participants out there that want to become involved in it. So it's a time where you can get, I think, a lot of support for these kinds of explorations we're talking about. It doesn't have to just be on the fringe or the avant-garde. It's something that's becoming the new commerciality. And that's exciting. I think one of the questions here is, what are the alternatives to HMDs and headsets? Well, this idea of the chrysalis environment, we're using screen technology, which, by the way, anyone tracking what's happening with screen technology knows it's expanding and becoming more and more powerful with every passing month, really. Flexible screen material, really micro pitch pixel density that allows a kind of three-dimensional effect without having any stereoscopic goggles or anything like that. The display technologies are moving very rapidly. There's a lot of dynamism in that. And also the way immersive sound works. And then you bring in the idea of biometric feedback to that. And then the idea of, how you create an interactive somatic experience with sound and visuals. And now you're starting to get into where the patient becomes part of the creation or the creator of their own healing environment. And that's what we want to create with the chrysalis. Not because, in a healing sense, strapping a box on your head is not necessarily the feeling that you want to have at the beginning of the healing experience. So that's why we're looking at other modalities. Yeah.
It's very intense having a headset. I spent working on Lion King, making a movie, spending a lot of time in VR. I have memories from VR now, from spending that much time in there. When the film came out, I felt like I'd already been there.
Yeah.
Because to my brain, I had, it was very burned into me.
You're bringing up something that's really, really important. These immersive technologies and the immersive experience and full virtual experience and whatever level of immersion, they hit the brain pan in a much more powerful way than any media form ever before devised. So again, the responsibility of these forms is really big. I mean, this is, everyone's, when television first came out, talked about what are going to be the positives and negatives of television. There's a tremendous amount of thinking on that's happened. Well, just advance that by or amplify that by 1,000 in the context of imagine when virtual experience becomes truly ubiquitous, where it's being experienced by people of all age ranges, and really that idea of the responsibility of immersion, is something we need to embed into the storytelling itself. I believe that we need to have the self-reflexive nature of what we're talking about as part of the process experiment, and actually creating really powerful dramatic stories that have that conflict, tension, and release, and yet show the hope of where these media experiences can go, as opposed to just being media that will break down the nature of representative democracy and the kinds of things we're seeing lately in the world forum of how social media is created. And for me, social media and all the different fragmentations of that kind of virtual experience have been kind of the metaverse on training wheels. It's been we're exploring different parts of what, once that's all coordinated together, And I'm not necessarily wanting, to be in an environment that's only controlled by one group like Meta, or one guy like Mark Zuckerberg. Although the fact that he's spending the amount of money he's spending and doing the experimentation he's doing in metaverse expression and virtual expression is phenomenal. I mean, that's these things need that kind of support. So we can't, just be naysayers. We have to also support the positive nature of what's going on there. And I think that there's one aspect that I think is a really good thing for us to talk about here as we start to get towards the end of our discussion, is the idea of interoperability between all of these worlds that are being created. The idea that it's not just going to be siloed worlds or elite worlds that only certain people can come to, a tiered system, that really the metaverse needs to have that true powerful network effect that happened at the beginning of the internet, that created such an inspiration, such a positive expression of like, wow, this is going to be a truly utopian idea, this idea of connecting with the internet. Now, of course, we've now explored many different routes and areas of that. But this idea of interoperability and finding a foundation for that interoperability, things like what the company Versus is doing, which is creating the spatial computing protocol, which has been standardized by the IEEE standards body, and making it all interoperable. The HTTP and TCP/IP of the metaverse is going to be really important to create that networking effect where all of us can connect together in these things, as opposed to it being all these different siloed, in a sense, solipsistic worlds. That's a kind of scary world I don't want to live in.
One that's disconnected, you mean?
Yeah, where everyone has their own sort of, solipsistic. These are some of the themes I played with in the Lawnmower Man and with Virtuosity. The idea that it can lead to a kind of disconnection from human process, a disconnection from human intimacy, from the nature of human love. We need to expand and amplify the nature of human intimacy and human love and human positive thinking or positive expression of discovery within these worlds. And that interoperability, I think, is one of the key things. And there's a lot of people that give just lip service to that. But it actually creating true interoperability, which did happen in the creation of the World Wide Web. That's what created the multi-trillion-dollar economy of the World Wide Web. Without that network effect, without that ability to create true interoperability amongst all of those web pages and all of these, we wouldn't have a lot of the world we have today. And so we need to see how we can do that in the context of the spatial computing revolution that's happening, which is really the foundation at the core of what the metaverse, of what these new forms of virtual and immersive worlds will be based on. So that idea of spatial computing and that being the sort of algorithmic foundation, and that being truly interoperable and open source, got to be open source. That's why the Versus spatial computing protocol is one of the open source protocols, and so that gives me hope.
Right. Yeah, I think there's some tremendous work being done in the open source community, and the USD is another thing that was released from Pixar and put out into the world in an attempt to have some standards.
No, I think that is an example of kind of a utopian idea actually being executed in the world, and it actually leading to positive outcomes, even positive business outcomes. So it actually all the things can be served in an open source environment, and the metaverse really has to be something that's interoperable and open source for us to really activate this idea of a true creator economy, of a true empowerment of creation within the context of these new mediums.
Like we have to learn how to interact again. We've kind of learned how to interact in the real world, and then the internet's come along in the last 5 minutes, and nobody knows how to behave on it. People are really
exactly. I think that's one of the things to just end on a positive note here. I think that we're in early days with all of this. Even computing itself and the human computer is early days. There's so many places we can evolve this to that are positive. And if we, again, continue to have that hope and focus our storytelling and story worlding and creation in positive outcomes, in healing outcomes, in outcomes that connect us as human beings, I think this can all be something that pivots, does an Aikido move into a very positive outcome for these new media forms. It doesn't have to be truly dystopian.
I love it. I'm an optimist as well, and your optimism is infectious. And I'd love to ask how can people find out more about what you're up to these days?
Well, I mean, we have virtualpsychedelics.com. www.virtualpsychedelics.com is about the company VPI. And I'm going to be having a film that did come out in theaters last year, Triumph.
Feature
film. It stars RJ Mitte of Breaking Bad. It's an inclusivity film about a young man who has cerebral palsy and wants to wrestle in the 1980s. So it's a kind of John Hughes movie of the 1980s, but with a inclusivity disablement theme. That'll be coming out in the next few months on digital platforms. And it's a very, positive, inspirational film. And RJ, that actor, he actually has cerebral palsy. So it has a lot of truth in it. And so it's, that's one of the things to look for. And then look for what I'm going to be doing with Lawnmower Man Reborn, because that's something I'm really trying to create a kind of movement around, an idea of flipping the entire nature of how a feature film can come out of a group mind process. That's one of the things that I want to engage as many people on as possible.
Well, I'm certainly going to be checking those things out myself. And I love sports movies. I don't follow sport whatsoever.
No, me too. I'm not a sports person at all, but I love sports. Yeah. Making a sports movie, it's the first time I did, was really fun. It was great.
I bet.
The drama of sport is so fantastic, especially when it has a positive outcome.
I watched the trailer today, and I'm excited to be able to see it when we're able to. Well, Brett, thank you so much for taking the time tonight, sharing your experience. I know we just had an hour. It feels like it went by in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, it was quick.
Yeah.
The light went down, and now I'm just a silhouette.
That's right. Different cinematic looks from beginning to the end of the podcast.
Okay. It's great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Ed, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Likewise, yeah, I'll look forward to the next time, and hopefully it'll be soon. Thank you as well to our listeners. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks. You can follow us at becomecgpro.com. We are a school, and we teach people mostly around real-time technologies, virtual production, that kind of thing. But again, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening out there. I feel inspired to go and, create things now. So let's go. Thank you.
Bye-bye.